What is up, people? Donna here, and today we're here to talk about one of my favorite lenses for the Sony APS-C system, the Sigma 16mm f1.4 DCDN. Quite a mouthful. I think I might have to end the video now or it'll get too long. Just kidding. A little while ago, I made a video of my favorite recommended lenses for the Sony a6000, a6300, and a6500. Lenses that I thought would make a great kit for anyone, and this was probably the most talked about lens in the comment section. Before it came out, everyone was talking about it. After it came out, everyone was still talking about it. People are loving this lens, and I'm here to tell you why. Some of the things that I want to go over in this video are some of the great stuff about this lens, some of the shortcomings of this lens and how you can kind of overcome that. What are the uses of this lens? Who is this lens for? I'm gonna answer some of your guys' questions that you asked me on Instagram. And most importantly, I'm gonna show you photos and video footage from this lens so you can make your own decision. Instead of just hanging around here all day, I thought we'd go out and really just see what this thing can do. Let's go. One of the first things that you notice when you get this lens is the build quality of it. It's made out of mostly metal. The focus ring has a rubber grip on it, which is super nice. It's smooth. It just feels really good. It has a little bit of a weight to it, which from my point of view, I think actually makes it feel better. It kind of makes it feel like it's crafted better than something that's super cheap and lightweight. One of my favorite things about this lens is the sharpness of it. As is to be expected, if you're shooting at that f1.4 to get your nice bokeh in the background or that shallow depth of field, you're gonna see a little bit of sharpness loss on the edges, but once you stop it down to f4, f8, f11, it is sharp all the way through the frame. One of my favorite things to do with it is architecture or landscape photography. So we got this cool architecture behind me. I'm gonna get a couple of shots of that now. Now, @2A Visuals on Instagram asked me, do you think 16mm is too wide? How often do you really use it? Now, I can say from personal experience that I use this thing all the time. It's a little bit deceiving because 16mm on an APS-C size sensor like this camera, Sony a6000, 6500, 6300, it's actually the equivalent of a 24mm if it was on a full frame camera. So what that means is it's actually cropping in a little bit more than the name suggests. That being said, it is still great for anything that you would want a wide angle lens for, but it's not so wide that it leaves other things out of the question. For example, you wouldn't typically think of a wide angle lens for portrait photos. But I set out earlier today with my wife to see if we could shoot a few portraits, and it worked great. You kind of just have to know what you're dealing with and just work to your advantages. So with portraits with the wide angle lens, what you're gonna end up with is getting a little bit more of the background in there. So you're showing off a little bit more of the entire scene, not just the model. That being said, when you get up nice and close, it shows off some pretty cool perspectives as well. This can actually work to your advantage if you're someone who shoots portraits and you want to kind of take advantage of a little bit of a different look, something unique, something that'll make you stand out. Using a wide angle lens can really help you. So to answer your question, I don't think that 16mm is too wide, especially on APS-C size sensors, and I use it all the time. It's on my camera almost every day. And when I have the option to go between my 18 to 105 and use the 18 end, I usually end up using this lens instead because I can get that shallow depth of field with the f1.4 aperture. For example, those portrait shots, you can get that nice blurry background, the bokeh in the background, because you've got that shallow depth of field. Not to mention it's great in low light, so for example, when I'm in my studio, it takes nice shots in there where the lighting situation just isn't quite the best. And just to throw one more thing in there, if you're looking for kind of a moodier version of product shots, it can be really cool too. Again, when you get up nice and close to something with the minimum focusing distance of about 3 inches on this thing, it can do some really cool things with the perspective and the way that you see those products. Now, Andrew, a picture on Instagram, asked me to give a couple of tips for people using this lens with cameras that don't have in-body stabilization. So what he's talking about there is the Sony a6000 and Sony a6300 don't have any kind of stabilization in the body to help with the little handshakes that you get. With the Sony a6500, which is the camera I'm filming on now, it actually has in-body stabilization. With those other cameras, it's nice to shoot with lenses that have stabilization built into them because then you don't have to worry so much. But if you do want to use this lens with one of those cameras, there are a couple of things that I can suggest. First of all, for photography, it never really bugs me that much. When I use it with my Sony a6000, I just make sure my shutter speed is there to compensate for any handshake, and I make sure I'm as stable as possible. That being said, when I'm shooting video in that case, it is a little bit more tough. I'm gonna either make sure that I'm on a tripod, I'm gonna use a gimbal. This is an excellent combination for a gimbal. I'm gonna use a strap and pull it tight against my neck to try and get out any of those little hand jitters. Or I'm going to, if I have to go handheld and I don't have a strap on me, I'm gonna tuck my elbows in as tight to my body as possible so that I can get rid of any of those little micro jitters and stabilize the footage as much as possible. One of the things that I get asked a lot about this lens is whether it would be a good lens for vlogging. Now, vlogging doesn't technically have to mean on one of these guys or handheld or anything like that. Technically, you can vlog on a tripod, but I think what they're really getting at is kind of going back to that idea of not having stabilization inside the lens. What we're gonna do here is a quick test to see if I was to throw the camera on the end of a GorillaPod, how big of a difference does it make with or without the in-body stabilization in the camera? Is it still usable if you have a Sony a6000 or a Sony a6300 that doesn't have in-body stabilization? Let's try it. So this is the 16mm mounted on my Sony a6500 with in-body stabilization turned on. So the body of the camera is actually doing some of the stabilizing, but I'm just kind of walking around to give you an idea of like if I was actually doing a vlog and I was walking around, maybe I'll go down some stairs here. Check that out. See how bumpy it is? So this is with the in-body stabilization on. Let's change it to off. So I've turned off the in-body stabilization. So now what you're seeing is just the camera. Any shake that's coming out of my hand, you're probably gonna see. Hopefully you'll see the difference between the two, but also hopefully, I mean, for those who have the 6000 or the 6300, hopefully this is usable. I'll go hit those stairs again so we can see what that would look like going down the stairs. Maybe a little shaky. Another thing that people brought up a handful of times was their worry about autofocus with this lens. And rightfully so. In the past, Sony has been known to not play nice with other manufacturers as far as the autofocus goes on the Sony cameras. But I'm happy to report that the autofocus with this lens is incredible. It's just as good as any of the Sony lenses that I have. It's nice and responsive. It doesn't hunt the same way that some of the older Sigma lenses did. It has control of all of the focus points on the sensor, whereas previously the older Sigma ones only could use the ones in the center. So you can feel good and confident that this lens is going to focus just as good as any of the native Sony lenses. So if you can't tell, I really like this lens. There are a couple of little drawbacks with it. For example, the fact that it doesn't have stabilization in it, that could be a drawback for some people. I know when I use it on my a6000, I have to be careful about it. I have to make sure that I'm taking precautions. It's definitely more of a thing for video shooters or vloggers who are going to be in handheld situations. But again, there are things that you can be doing to make sure that it's still a good combination. I know I've heard a couple of people talk about the size of the lens being being a problem. It's not a huge lens by any means, but if you're used to the kit lens, or let's say the 16mm 2.8 from Sony, or even the 20mm 2.8 from Sony, they're like pancake lenses. So this is quite a bit bigger than that, but I find it to be a nice size for the size of the body of the 6000, 6300, or 6500. The other thing is that if you're used to a more traditional focus ring, this might be a little bit weird for you. It's the focus by wire system that's in pretty much every lens that goes on these Sony cameras. So if you are a Sony user and you've been using the E-mount system for a while, this isn't going to be any different than that. It is nice and smooth, it focuses nicely. So what more can you ask for? So who is this lens for? I would say if you own a Sony a6500, this is a must-have lens. Because you've got the in-body stabilization, there are very few drawbacks to this lens. It's great for videographers, it's good for vloggers, good for anyone who does landscape or architecture photography. And if I may be so bold, I think it's good for anyone who wants to have unique looking photos in portraits or in product photography as well. That f1.4 aperture is great in low light, and it's going to allow you to get really cool cinematic looking shots with the blurry background and the bokeh. Honestly, I think this lens just might be a good one that everyone should have in their kit. Not to mention that for the price that you pay for it, what you're getting is incredible. Right now it's going for $449 in the US, or if you're from the Great White North like me, it's going for $579. If you have the kit lens for your Sony a6000, 6300, or 6500, this would be a great upgrade, especially if you find yourself using the wide end of that lens the most. This would be a great replacement for that. Plus it's going to be way better in low light. Plus you're going to be able to get more of that background blur that's going to make you stand out from everybody else. If you have any questions about this lens, don't hesitate to let me know. Leave a comment below or hit me up on Instagram. My username is @DunnaDidIt. Go follow me over there. I'm more than happy to help out as much as I possibly can. And finally, Orchids and Feathers asked over on Instagram if this lens would be an ideal lens to have for APS-C Sony cameras. And I have to say yes. I believe that everyone who's using this camera system should have this lens in their kit. It's probably my favorite lens right now. I do hope that that was helpful for you. If it was, hit that thumbs up. It really does help let YouTube know to share this video around to other people. If you know someone that might be interested in this, make sure to share it with them. If you want to be friends, click the little circle to subscribe to my channel. Check out this other video. I think you'll really like it, and I'll see you next time. I didn't take a picture.